Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is a show where you can have your property related questions answered by a team of property experts, and joining me today is John Howard, property developer, mentor, author, investor and
thoroughly good chap, but I'm a property developer, so that isn't said very often, to be fair.
I've used that one before.
Thank you.
Okay, and joining John actually for the second time on Property Question Time is Vincent Wong, who's a property entrepreneur and investor. Welcome to you, Vincent.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
Good to have you back. Okay, John.
Yes.
Some are arguing that immigration increases have caused current housing shortages, but others argue that it's only relevant in the South Coast counties, i.e. the points of entry. Do the panel think that immigration is really the cause of housing stock shortages, or is it simply the inability of younger people in particular to afford purchases causing developers to limit their production? So I think what they're asking there is really, if people can't afford to buy what's being built, is that the real cause of it, or is immigration really affecting
that's a big,
it?
we could do a whole show on that, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Between us all.
Just keep it to 5 minutes.
Just keep it to 5 minutes. Okay, so here we go. So net 700,000 people came into the country last year. Clearly, they've all got to be housed somewhere. Some have got money. I mean, I sold 2 or 3 properties in Birmingham on a development to people from Hong Kong, who moved from Hong Kong. So some have got the money to buy, which is great, and obviously they are a real benefit to society if they're coming for good jobs and they can afford to do so, and the government want them here. Clearly, though, for 700,000 is totally unsustainable going forward. We've got a massive housing shortage. Really, is it caused by local authorities not granting enough planning permission? Is it caused by the 10 top house builders that control the housing market? They built 64% last year of all the houses in the UK. In the 1970s, small developers, which we would be considered small, less than 250 houses a year, built 73% of the housing stock. So, you know, there's lots of reasons as to why we're not building enough houses. The cost of the land is a massive one, and I think when Labour get in, they're going to look at this and you know, very hard for new towns to be built up north because of the, you know, you just can't make the figures stack up. Down south, they've managed to build 1 or 2 new villages and towns around Cambridge and so on, but there's some places, some developments now around Cambridge that haven't got any water. The water's got to be piped down from the north, and the pipe's not sorted. So for me, there's lots of space up north, and we need to try and persuade people, be it by tax benefits and developers, to start building more up north and less down south.
But if the jobs aren't there, John?
Well, the jobs will, if people go, the jobs will come, and the government can have, you know, getting companies to relocate up north is just, you know, beneficial tax benefits and all the rest of it. I would have thought that's not too difficult, but everyone wants to live down south, and that is part of the problem. Not just the fact that we have 700,000 people move in last year. That's another massive problem, of course. So I think it's a blend of a number of issues that all come together. It's a perfect storm. One thing I would say though about young people banging on about not being able to buy a house, and I've been criticised for this on numerous occasions, partly by my own family, which is nice. However, the fact is you can go to Derby and you can buy a terrace house for £110,000, and if you can't live where mummy and daddy live, well, tough. You know, perhaps mummy and daddy saved up and have only moved there 10 or 15 years. Perhaps they lived in a more modest area. So I've got no sympathy for them.
But John, you've heard me say this before. I just have this feeling that if properties were affordable, and what I mean by affordable, I mean easy enough to finance, i.e. low deposits, longer term for repayments.
Well, we hope that would happen in the budget.
Well, hold on, yeah. But if those houses are capable of being purchased by young people and the facilities are there for them to do it, I think developers will build every house you need. You know, if you want to hit 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 a year, they'll do it.
Yeah,
they'll do it.
I probably agree with you.
You know, because I know, you know, when I was a kid, I bought my first house, and I think it was about £4,000 or £5,000, and I think
It wasn't 400 or 500 in those days, to be honest with you, Stephen.
But you know, I put a couple of £100 down and did it, and I paid for it.
But what I would say is, I think the way to control it more is to say these are only for first-time buyers. These houses can only purchase by a bona fide first-time buyer, not a buy-to-let. Probably upset you, won't it, saying that?
No, it doesn't. Not at all.
Not a buy-to-let investor.
But again, John, we have these complex situations where developers are forced into producing what they call affordable houses, often on a different development. I don't know why the planners just don't say, or the government just don't say, look, if you're building 100 flats here, 20 of them have got to be sold off at, you know, affordable rates set by the Inland Revenue for that area.
But they should be for private ownership.
Private ownership, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because again, I mean, Vincent, you'll know, we've had a lot in the press lately about poor quality housing for people renting, but the majority of those complaints are coming from housing association owned properties, not private landlords. Because a private landlord in the main will know the value of a good tenant. And to have a good tenant, you've got to offer a good property. Whereas housing associations have got no responsibility to anybody really, have they? Do you think? Am I right?
Well, I'm not sure about why. It's only in Britain that we have such an obsession with home ownership. I mean, if you go to continental Europe, people look at housing as just a place to stay. Yeah. I think it's just historically we always view our homes as our castle is our biggest investment. But you think about it, the only reason why people are so obsessed with buying a home is that being a tenant actually gives you no right at all. You feel vulnerable because of the legislation. The tenants have very few rights because of the AST. In Europe, people will just rent for life. And that probably leads on to...
But it's a difficult thing, isn't it? Because the assured short-term tenancies were brought in Thatcher's era, when the idea was...
Thank God for that.
That you couldn't get a tenant out of your building once you'd let it. So it was stopping people investing in homes for rent.
Guess what's going to happen under Labour? We're going to go full circle again, aren't we?
We'll be welcoming Mr. Rackman back, won't we? I think. But
you knew him, I didn't know him.
There we go. Okay, thank you very much for that. Vincent, many leasehold blocks are suffering difficulties in terms of high service charges. This can cause residents financial problems in terms of affordability and indeed saleability. Do the experts think that a mandatory cap based on the percentage of service charge against capital value should be a mandatory requirement? This could save residents from excessive costs and further enhance buy-to-let returns, thereby attracting more homes to be available for rent. That's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we're talking about interventions and regulations again. I never feel that is the answer to everything. It's true that there are a lot of properties have very high service charges and they're not passed on to the residents, and that's unforgivable, really. So what's the way around it? I mean, do you cap it, sort of blanket cap across the city like in London? Because I think high service charge also serves the purpose of having better protection for the tenants. I mean, look at Grenfell. Was it ever, done up properly to ensure the safety of the residents?
No.
But I think a better solution would be to make things easier for residents to have an opportunity to maybe buy a share of the freehold, so they have a better say in managing their own property.
Vincent, I live across the road here in a very big dual block of flats, and half of those flats are now unsaleable because the service charges hit something like 2% of the capital value. And there are so many lenders that will now say, if the service charge is more than 1%, we're not lending.
Yeah, but also to cap it so that we incentivize the buy-to-let investors to come in to buy them up in order to offer more housing to the Joe public is I don't think is right. Because at the end of the day, it's not the government's job to create opportunities for buy-to-let landlords. And also, I think from the investor's point of view, it is down to us to carry out our due diligence and stack the numbers before we even get into it. There are so many other properties available.
Well, yeah, that's the buy-to-let angle, but these are people's homes too, who need and want to move sometimes and can't because of mortgage restrictions on their property. They can't sell.
That is a problem when it comes to the residents living in those blocks, and they live in those blocks probably to begin with. They don't have high earnings, so by paying high service charges, in fact, a lot of mortgage lenders actually don't even lend on those blocks anymore.
No, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah,
I think Michael Gove, our housing secretary for the moment, at least. He wants to do away really with leasehold flats and get into a situation like it is in Scotland. Well, I'm selling some flats in Scotland, and to be honest with you, it isn't that different because there's still going to be a service charge. Okay, the freeholder, once you've sold your flat, it's not leasehold. It's a shared freehold system, so there's no value in it. But they've just made all the flats in the UK on 999-year leases at £0 ground rent. So there's no value in the freehold, keeping the freehold as an investor anyway now. So it's not a lot different. And of course you have the ability, if you all get together, to buy the freehold if you want to. But of course, there's a lot of responsibility.
I think we should, because we're holding the leaseholders accountable for the amount of money they charge. What do they actually use it for? I mean, it needs to be properly accounted for.
Well, yes, but one of the problems is here, we went through a phase of building these blocks with swimming pools, gyms, everything else.
Not all like yours.
And nobody had a thought about this on the day of building. They had no thought about what the consequences
No, because
of
they're
this
trying
would
to
be.
sell them. They're
Yeah.
trying to sell them.
Yeah, and again,
with a subsidised service charge.
well, again, I think Vincent touched on this. Is
Oldest
that in
trick
the
in the
early
book.
days, some developers subsidised the service
Never.
charge to give a sort of false impression of how cheap it is to live there, and it's not.
It's only for maybe the first year or something, and then you have the next 24 years to worry about.
A bit like marriage, isn't it?
I won't go there.
On that note, we'll go to the break. Okay, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break. We'll be asking John and Vincent more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm joined by John Howard and Vincent Wong. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And John, do the panel think that the restriction of no-fault evictions planned by the government is a retrograde step, taking us back to the days of secure tenancies, leaving landlords unable to take back their properties as and when they require, leading to reticence to invest in rentable property?
Stephen, I think it's a complete and utter disgrace that this Conservative government, of even suggesting it, never mind going to make it law. But you have to step back a little bit and think, why are they doing it? One of the reasons is that families that can't afford to buy are renting on a long-term basis. And if you are a landlord and you can get someone out within 6 months, a year, whatever it might be, and they have a family, 2 or 3 children at the local school and so on, they're looking at votes, and they're looking at protecting people who are likely to vote Tory. In the old days, well, nowadays still, they encourage as many people to buy property because they know if they buy a property, they're far more likely to vote, or were likely to vote Tory than they were Labour. And that's always been their thinking on the subject. And that is one of the reasons why this country's had the most amazing help from the government. Help to buy, lending deposits. It's done a remarkable job over these. Homes England that provides funding to people like us for developments. So they've done an awful lot. But this particular law to me is wrong, because they're saying if you rent your home, okay, they're going to make there'll be clauses in there where if you want to live in it yourself, you can get it back, I'm sure.
Or if you're selling it.
Or well, if you're selling it, it's a farce. There's no point in having it, because all you say is, well, we're going to sell it. and you'll get it empty. So I think that law, well, that might be the case with the Conservative government, but I think if then Labour get in, I don't know how you feel, but I think if Labour get in, they'll get rid of that, and we'll go back to what was called assured tenancies, which was market rent of sorts, but then they might cap the rents, although Ireland have tried that and it's been a disaster, and Scotland have done it partly and that hasn't worked very well either.
The cap in Scotland's off now, isn't it? This week, I think.
It's off on some of them, I think, this week.
But John, just coming back to this business of people staying in their properties longer, that's fine, and those people should be given security of tenure.
Should they?
Yes, I do.
I don't think they should.
Hold on. But I think it's landlords that need to decide for themselves, or perhaps be decided for them, whether they are short-term landlords or long-term landlords. Now, with a short-term landlord, that's fine because he can get his property back with a certain type of lease within a limited time. So both the tenant and he know that it's only for 6 months or 12 months. Okay, cool. Yeah. Or if it's an institutional lender, which the government are trying to encourage over and above
that's
the
what
private,
this is all about as well, of course. Yeah.
Then they are financially capable of being able to offer their property for rent for long periods of time, maybe 5, 10 years or whatever.
Yes. Now the landlord, basically the landlords in this country provide, is it 4 million homes? Is it something like that? Isn't it for people for private ownership, or in terms of investment property. The difficulty is this, and I speak at these different events, and no one seems to. A lot of people don't get it, but this is a fact that if you tell a bank you can't get vacant possession of your property, it isn't worth as much because it's not empty. They go, I want to keep it occupied. Well, you might want to keep it occupied, but I can tell you now, it's probably worth 70% of open market value if it's got a tenant in it, compared to 100% of open market value if it's vacant. So at some point, these banks and building societies will catch on to this and say, hang on a minute, what do we do? We can't, the mortgages come up. We're not going to renew it because you can't get vacant possession.
And that's the whole idea for having buy-to-let mortgages. In fact, the UK is the only country in the world where you can just pay the interest irrespective of your income.
Fantastic country.
And it's just all based on the rental. Country. Yeah, but once you put in regulations, buy-to-let is going to disappear. Then it's going to be a chicken and egg scenario. Yeah. Who's going to provide housing?
For the smaller investor, it's already disappearing. For the smaller investor, it's already disappearing. The government are having a go at smaller landlords. The conditions aren't going to be there. I mean, maybe, you could bring in a regulation that says you can only offer 6 to 12 months lets on your property if you've got a sort of private individual mortgage, if you're not a corporate entity. I don't know.
It never works, though. I mean, remember, we used to be able to do sell and rent back up till 2011. So investors bought those properties at below the market value, promising the homeowners that they could rent the property back for good. And then because we were going through such a boom in the housing market, shortly after, lots of people got evicted. Yeah. So you can't promise anything to anyone without knowing whether that's going to turn out to be the case or not. So it became a regulated business. We're the only country, in fact, that we can't do sell and rent back. So I just don't think any kind of short-term or long-term rent is going to suffice, to be honest.
But don't you think we've got to do something? I just think our rental
rules. Why have we got to do anything?
Well, because we've got a problem over housing.
Okay, there are ways around it. For example, we've never thought about granting an option for the tenants to buy, giving them incentives to stay.
But they're probably buying. They're probably renting.
They're fantastic. Sorry?
They're probably renting because they can't afford to.
Right. So while they're renting, they can actually save up for their deposit eventually. They fix the price at which they can buy in the future. So they get all the capital appreciation and they look after the property like it's their own. They've been doing that in the United States and Australia and New Zealand for years.
Don't like that idea? What's wrong with that?
It's not all down to the government. I mean,
do everything.
Yeah.
You sound like a socialist you are these days.
It's all about the ability to be able to buy.
But not everyone can buy. That's life, I mean, not being rude, but not, we'd all love to go to Barbados on holiday every year, but some of us can't afford it. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the problem with people in this country today is they want everything.
We don't have to please everybody.
No, they want everything on a plate. Yeah. They want to be able to go on holiday, buy a house, buy a car, brand new car, by the way, and all the rest of it. Our parents didn't do that. Your parents didn't do that. Your parents didn't do that. My parents didn't do that. Oh, I go out for dinner most nights. I mean, it's bonkers. Absolutely bonkers.
Right. Well, I think perhaps we better move on.
I agree with John, totally.
Thank you. Well done. Well said.
Okay, Vincent. Do the panel think the new regulations in relation to rental properties will come into force before a general election later this year, or if we have a change of government, will they be reversed or shelved anyway?
I think that's more of a question for John, because he's more sort of politically aware. But I think a regulation like the no fault eviction or the HC certificate being sort of upper level, I think these are all sort of popular choices for Conservative supporters. So
not, yeah.
So yeah, it could be
don't
before the election.
Don't forget he's a property developer as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so it would be. It would probably be before the election, only to be overruled after the election.
Do you think afterwards Labour will make them tougher? I think.
Well, yeah, I think it will, because it's all about regulations, all about nationalistic sort of ideals. So yeah, it's not for me to sort of predict. But if you ask whether it's going to be installed before the election, I think the answer is yes.
John?
Well, I think they need votes, and I think there's an awful lot of tenants in this country. But they're talking about only 10% of people under 40 voting Tory. Well, there's only way they're going to change that is provide very cheap, low deposits to buy houses between now and the election. And they haven't managed that at the moment, and bring in some rules to protect tenants. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think afterwards, Labour will only, make it even harder for landlords, because they're not, they don't believe in really, do they believe in home ownership, Labour? Perhaps they believe in you owning one home, but no more than that. So you're in big trouble, aren't you?
And you.
And you.
And you.
And you. So we're all in big trouble.
And all our viewers.
And all our viewers. And big taxes.
I just sit here commentating on it.
And big taxes, because they'll get in and they'll say, well, we didn't know it was this bad, or we can't afford to do this, that and the other. People who've got it will have to pay. That's you.
It's all down to the fundamental debate about home ownership. Is it an entitlement or is it a privilege? I mean, we had to save a long time to get our deposit to buy our first property. And then many, many years after to get our first buy-to-let. And then we have to take all the risks of being landlords, not to mention how some tenants trash the properties. We always say no fault. I mean, the fault is on both sides, all right? I mean, sometimes, yeah, landlords do need to evict tenants, but have you heard the horror stories of what tenants are up to? They're told to trash the properties just because they can. So there's huge risk.
But you see, there's another angle to this, though, that it's all right bringing in legislation, but you've got to get that legislation through the courts. And the current waiting time to get into court, it's just ridiculous. You could easily wait 12 months to have something heard.
I don't think they're going to get it done before the election, but just merely mentioning it being in the in the agenda could actually win some votes.
But I think John's right on that. I think the only way to get real volume of votes is to bring in some kind of ease of purchase deal, perhaps an extension of Help to Buy. I don't know.
Well, we all thought there was rumour that it was 1% deposits for first-time buyers was coming in under a new Help to Buy
1%.
scheme. 1% deposits, yeah. But I imagine what they haven't managed to do, why it didn't come in, I'd imagine it's because they haven't got enough building societies or lending institutions to agree to it prior to the budget. So it's probably why it didn't come in. But they may well have a mini budget before the election. It might come in then, of course. But we'll see.
Well, I think that's probably the only answer. But that's all we have time for. So a big thank you to Vincent Wong. Thank you very much for coming in. John Howard, thank you very much for coming in. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. Look forward to that.